here with Isiah Thomas. Zeke, you played against NBA champ Michael Thompson twice in the finals. His son, Klay Thompson, recovering and rehabbing from a torn ACL. He's expected to miss the first part of the Warriors season. Right now, Vegas projects the Warriors to have the 9th most wins. That's down from last year when they were projected to have, the entire title. Here's what Michael had to say about the Warriors.
No, they're not going to be as good as they were last year. And by the way, I predict Steph's going to have about 500 threes this year without having to share the ball that much back in the backcourt with Klay. So he's going to come back to his MVP form we saw 2 years ago. And Draymond is motivated to have a great year because his contract year is coming up. So I think those two guys, and with the addition of D'Angelo Russell and the other role players that they've signed, I think they'll be right in the mix. You know, somewhere between 5, 6 seed until Klay comes back 100%, and then they'll be ready to make their move.
All right, Isiah, are you buying that the Warriors will be in the mix for a championship with no Kevin Durant, with half the season without Klay Thompson?
They'll be in the mix for the playoffs. I mean, the West is so tough, but they as currently as their roster stands, they have, very little chance of contending or winning the championship the way the West is. I mean, the West is loaded right now. And when you're without Klay, and when you're without, Durant, I mean, that's a big knockdown off your team. Now, I do think Steph will try to have a great season. And when I say try to have a great season, I mean that the defensive looks that he's going to get this year is going to be intensified because there's no Klay.
Right.
Because there's no Durant.
Similar to the playoffs.
Similar to the play. So the single coverage that he used to get is no longer.
Even with D'Angelo out there, it's not going to be the same type of thing.
Every time Steph comes off a screen this year, he's going to be double teamed. And this is what made Jordan, Kareem, and those guys so great as scorers, right? Because for 15 years, every time they touched the basketball, they were double teamed. They were trapped. So they were always playing 1 against 2 every time they touched it. Steph has had the luxury, Durant and also Klay, those 3 guys together have had the luxury of always playing single coverage and then always playing against switcher defenses where I'm matched up against a bigger guy who doesn't have the foot speed that I have or can cover the ground that I can cover. This year, I do think Steph will see more intensified defenses. I think he knows that, and I think he'll be ready to perform, and he will play well. I just don't know if it'll be enough.
And I also think the audience needs to understand, let's just pretend for a moment KD never pops his Achilles, and he re-signs with Golden State. And he's coming back full strength. And Klay has the torn ACL. There would still be real questions if that Warriors team was going to win the title, given 5 straight trips to the finals and the fatigue of 5 straight 100-game seasons. Just because they lost this year and guys left doesn't mean Steph is not fatigued. Doesn't mean Draymond is not fatigued. There are not many people in the world that actually haven't experienced something similar, but one of them who does sit right next to us. Yeah. You guys won back-to-back titles, but the audience should remember, you went to 3 straight NBA finals, and then that next year, playoffs was quick.
5 Eastern Conference Finals.
5 Eastern Conference Finals in a row, 3 NBA Finals in a row, and then the next year, I think it was the first round. But how much of that was that you guys were getting older, but how much of it was the fatigue of what you had done the previous 3 years?
It's the fatigue. And Mikhail and I were covering the finals, and we was having an interesting conversation because everything that Golden State was saying at the podium after the game, he and I were looking at each other saying, man, that sounds just like the stuff that we were saying at the end when it's over. And the fatigue factor comes in with soft tissue injuries. The soft tissue injuries of a calf, a hamstring, a quad, or you'll pull a bicep. So those soft tissue injuries really add up. And then the mental concentration. You just can't concentrate. You can't sustain concentration. So you saw Golden State, they're playing 4 to 5 minute bursts. And then you go, oh, they're back, but they can't sustain it. Where you saw a Toronto team that can sustain it, they can come first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. And that's because you're just fatigued, you're just mentally drained. And that shows up on turnovers, missed shots, transition defense. Those are the 3 boxes that you look at when you talk about
one thing I'd be concerned about, too, because I think you guys did a great job. Draymond Green. Draymond's going to be playing for a new contract. How can he focus with that mental fatigue? Because the one thing is, when you get mental fatigue, you do things uncharacteristic. That's what I'll say about you. At the end, I saw you do some things that uncharacteristic because, man, I'm tired of this.
Tired.
You know, I'm tired. Like, even when you walked off the court. If we could go back on that again, the Isiah I know, oh, man, you congratulate them, man. Y'all took it to it.
100%.
I'm tired.
100%.
This is going on too long, year after year after year. I'm glad you brought up that point and mentioning you and Mikal and the similar conversations the Warriors were saying at the podium.
So tell me where the Warriors stack up in the West. We talked about how good the Lakers were, the Clippers, you have the Jazz, you have teams that played well last year. I'm just curious if you think they are on the fringe to make the playoffs, how you would stack the West up.
They're talented enough, and Steph is good enough to get them in the playoffs, right? No matter who you put around him.
Yep.
He's talented enough and good enough to get them in the playoffs. What he's not good enough to do is overcome Harden and Westbrook. Okay, Paul George and Kawhi.
Yeah.
Okay, right. LeBron James and Anthony Davis. CJ and Dame, right? He's you know, when you're at that level, right, that he's been at for so long, and he's going to be challenged. And the one thing that we don't have as little guys, and I call him a little guy even though he's bigger than me, right? But the one thing that we don't have that overwhelming physicality where we can walk into the gym and be like, look, I'm bigger than you.
Right. On a bad day, I can get you 25 steal.
Yeah, and I can hit you in a way that makes you say, okay, I don't want to mess with you today, right? That's what the bigger guys always have. Smaller guys, we don't have that. The only thing that we have that we can get by with is wit. And if we can outsmart you on that day, we can win. But when the bigger guy shows up and he's playing smart, right? He's not making mistakes. He's stronger than you. He's faster than you. Then that bigger, faster, stronger guy is going to beat you if he's not, you know, making mistakes.
And the fatigue part of it also, not for Steph specifically, but for the organization, it plays such an enormous factor as far as when you have been competing for championships.
Yes.
And you know, going into the season, all right, we're not going to disqualify ourselves. We know this isn't a championship team. How hard do you get up for those games in February when you're not going for 73 wins? You're not trying to prove the world wrong on the Durant stuff. What little mini battles do you create within yourself? And it's one of the reasons why the biggest myth in NBA, maybe in sports history, was, man, if Jordan wouldn't have retired, they'd have won 8 straight. No, they wouldn't have.
No, if Shaq wouldn't have left.
Okay, maybe they wouldn't have gotten that other 3-peat.
No.
Sure, but maybe they still would have won 6, but in a different order of operations. Like the idea that anyone, what Jordan's retirement gave that Bulls team, even if they wouldn't have wished for it, was a reset. A chance to have those shorter seasons, a chance to change the team up. The Warriors didn't get that. The Warriors didn't have Durant didn't get hurt at the end of the regular season, got bounced in the first round. They played as many games they would have played if they'd won the title. So they don't get any reprieve just because they lost, and that's a real thing.
Are the Warriors underdogs going into next season? Because that's
absolutely.
hilarious.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Underdog Golden State Warriors.
Well, they're without Clay and Durant.
That's true.
They're underdogs.
That's true. All right, Isiah, we'll see you a little bit later. Coming up, is Baker Mayfield already as good as one Patrick Mahomes? That's next on First Things First.
Hey, before we go to the break, can you give me your top 10 NBA players? Real quick.
Here we go.
Real quick.
Yeah.